One of them died this month, but not from the illness everyone had spent years watching for. And weirdly, the thing nobody was worried about is the thing that actually got him. Here's what really happened to the Jurassic Park cast. Who kept working, who walked away, and who Hollywood quietly forgot. Sam Neill, Dr. Alan Grant. For a while this year, it genuinely looked like Sam Neill had won. He'd been living with a rare blood cancer since 2022, diagnosed mid-press tour for Jurassic World Dominion. Of all times, the kind of timing that feels almost cruel in hindsight. Stage 3 angioimmunoblastic T-cell lymphoma. Years of brutal chemo followed, and none of it worked the way doctors hoped. That's usually where these stories end quietly, with a decline nobody talks about publicly. His didn't. In 2026, he tried something newer. A CAR-T therapy trial in Australia. The kind of treatment that barely existed a decade earlier. That April, it cleared the cancer completely. No trace left in his body. He beat it. That was supposed to be the end of the story. And for a while, it really felt like it was. He talked about it openly, almost lightly, the way people do once the worst part is behind them. 3 months later, he was gone. His family confirmed the death on July 13th, sudden and unexpected. For a couple of days, nobody knew why, and speculation filled the gap online almost immediately, the way it always does now. His manager eventually stepped in to clarify. It wasn't the cancer. He'd genuinely beaten that. He died of pneumonia, which is kind of strange when you sit with it. The fight everyone had spent 4 years publicly watching wasn't the thing that got him in the end. Honestly, that part still doesn't sit right with people. It's the kind of ending that makes you want to find a bigger meaning in it, and there just isn't one. He'd played Grant across nearly every sequel for almost 30 years. The guy who couldn't stand kids in the first film, and then spent the whole thing keeping 2 of them alive. He'd reportedly filmed 4 more projects in his final year, including posthumous roles arriving later this year. Family held a private memorial back home in New Zealand. No press, no cameras, just the people who actually knew him. That's it. No warning. Just gone. Laura Dern, Dr. Ellie Sattler. Out of the original leads, how many just kept working? No scandal, no gap, no reinvention arc to sell you. 1. Dern's it. She was already Oscar nominated before this film for Rambling Rose, back when she was in her early 20s, and still getting compared to her mother, Diane Ladd, who'd been nominated in the same category the same year. That's a strange thing to carry into a summer blockbuster about dinosaurs. After Jurassic Park, the nominations kept coming. Wild in 2014, playing a version of grief that felt almost uncomfortably real, and finally the win for Marriage Story in 2020. The kind of role that critics call a culmination rather than a breakthrough. In between all of that, she led the resistance in The Last Jedi and anchored 2 seasons of Big Little Lies opposite Reese Witherspoon and Nicole Kidman, playing a character sharp enough that people forgot she'd ever played anyone else. She reprised Ellie Sattler across every single sequel through Dominion, never once stepping away from the role that started it all, even once she didn't need it anymore. In 2026, she joined the White Lotus Season 4, in a role Mike White reportedly wrote for her, specifically after Helena Bonham Carter's exit mid-production. Which honestly says a lot about where she still sits in the industry. Showrunners don't rewrite characters around actresses who faded. They rewrite them around the ones they can't imagine losing. No tragedy to dig up here. No comeback narrative needed. Which might honestly be the rarest story on this whole list. A career that just kept climbing, quietly, without a single dip worth talking about. Sometimes the least dramatic story is the one that's hardest to find anywhere else. Jeff Goldblum. At some point, he stopped fighting that and leaned all the way in. Before this role, he was the guy from The Fly. Off-kilter, hard to place, a character actor's character actor who'd never quite crossed into leading man territory. After it, full pop culture fixture. The Grandmaster in the Marvel Thor films. Independence Day. A line delivery so specific it became its own meme format decades before memes were really a thing people talked about. Here's the part people don't expect though. Somewhere in the middle of all that fame, he became an actual working jazz musician. Not a vanity project, not a celebrity side hobby with a rented backing band. A real one, fronting a real group. The Mildred Snitzer Orchestra. playing piano on stages most actors his level of famous would never even attempt. In 2026, that tour sold out Royal Albert Hall in London, a venue that doesn't exactly hand out sellouts for novelty acts. And yeah, that's not a career pivot most actors his age even attempt, let alone pull off convincingly. Married to Emily Livingston since 2014, 2 sons, a life that by most accounts looks genuinely settled despite decades in the spotlight. At 73, he's arguably more visible right now than he was in 1993, between the touring, a role as the wizard in the Wicked films, and a public persona that's only gotten more distinct with age rather than fading into it. Which is a strange thing to be able to say about anyone from a 30-year-old blockbuster. Most careers from that era have long since gone quiet. His somehow got louder. Richard Attenborough. Here's something people forget. The man behind Spared No Expense had already won 2 Oscars before he ever set foot on that island. Attenborough played Hammond Warm, a little too pleased with himself, dangerously optimistic about things he couldn't actually control. It's a performance that reads almost comfortingly grandfatherly the first time you watch it, and unbearably ironic every time after. Off-screen, he directed Gandhi to Best Picture and Best Director back in 1983, a film that took years and multiple failed funding attempts to even get made. Not a small thing to have on your resume walking into a dinosaur movie as a supporting actor persuaded out of a 14-year acting hiatus by Spielberg himself. His own life had far less control in it than Hammond's optimism ever suggested. In the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, he lost his daughter Jane, his granddaughter Lucy, and Jane's mother-in-law, all 3 in a single day. That's the kind of loss most people never fully recover from, and by most accounts, he didn't either. He spoke about it publicly only rarely, and always carefully. He came back once for The Lost World, then mostly stepped into directing and public life, taking on roles like Chancellor of the University of Sussex rather than chasing more film work. In his final years, he was largely wheelchair-bound, living in a nursing home in London with his wife of nearly 70 years. He died in August 2014, at 90, from complications after a fall, while the next film in this very franchise, Jurassic World, was shooting a few miles away. Spielberg called him a dear friend. That's a strange one to sit with. The man who gave this franchise its heart has been gone for over a decade now. Longer than some people watching this have been alive. Bob Peck, you know the line, "Clever girl." Everyone does. It's one of those lines people still quote without even remembering the actor's name behind it, which is its own kind of tragedy for a performance this good. Peck came out of serious British stage work, the kind of career where other actors talk about you like you're the standard to hit, rather than a peer to compete with. Royal Shakespeare Company trained, respected long before Hollywood ever noticed him, with a reputation built on discipline rather than charisma. Jurassic Park should have opened the door to a much bigger international career, the kind of crossover moment that usually launches a decade of leading roles. One handful of scenes. That's genuinely all it took to make him unforgettable to an entire generation of moviegoers who couldn't have told you his name if you'd asked them. Instead, shortly after the film came out, he was diagnosed with cancer. He fought it for years before he died in 1999, at just 53, an age that feels almost cruelly early for someone whose bigger chapter should have still been ahead of him. His final role, in The Miracle Maker, was released after his death and dedicated to his memory. And here's the part that's a little sad. For most people watching this right now, Peck was already gone before they'd even clocked how much they liked him in that one scene in the jungle. He never got to see what the character or the franchise became. Every other name on this list you already recognize. This one, you're probably about to wish you didn't. One scene, the parking garage handoff with Nedry, trading a shaving cream can for stolen embryos, delivered with just enough oily charm to make the character memorable off a single appearance. Mattered enough that the studio brought the character back decades later for Jurassic World Dominion, treating Dodgson as unfinished business worth revisiting. Except Thor wasn't the one who came back. In 2016, he was convicted of performing a lewd act on a 13-year-old girl he'd been privately coaching through his acting studio, a place where parents had trusted him to mentor their kids. 6 years in prison, registered sex offender for life, a status that follows him permanently regardless of anything else on his resume. So when Dodgson returned for Dominion in 2022, the role just quietly went to Campbell Scott instead, with no acknowledgement of the original actor at all. No tribute reel, no mention in interviews, nothing. To be fair, there wasn't really a decision to make there. Thor hasn't worked in the industry since. Hard to imagine that changing, and honestly, most people wouldn't want it to. Samuel L. Jackson. You barely see him in this film. His character's ending happens almost entirely off-screen. One radio call and then silence. No death scene, no closure, just a name that quietly stops mattering to the plot. And somehow he's one of the most talked about names on the whole cast list anyway, which says something about how much presence a small role can carry when the right actor is in it. This film wasn't a stepping stone for him. It was closer to a starting gun. Die Hard sequels, A Time to Kill, Pulp Fiction the year before, which was already changing the entire trajectory of his career before Jurassic Park even hit theaters. Then Django Unchained, and eventually Nick Fury, a role that's kept him inside the Marvel machine for over a decade, appearing in more films than almost any other actor alive by most box office tallies. He's also made room for quieter work in between the blockbusters, like the lead in Apple TV's The Last Days of Ptolemy Gray, a role that reminded people he could still do restrained, dramatic work when he wanted to. In 2026, he's headlining his first ever TV series, Frisco King, a Tulsa King spin-off that got renamed and relocated from New Orleans to Texas before it even aired. A fairly public mid-development shift for a project built entirely around him. Same character, different city entirely. Which is kind of funny when you think about it. The guy who dies in Act 1 turned into the busiest man on this entire list, and it isn't particularly close. Honestly, it's hard to find a decade since 1993 where he wasn't in something people were talking about. B.D. Wong, Dr. Henry Wu. Quick one, because his story is less about drama and more about quiet consistency, which honestly makes it stand out on a list this heavy with tragedy and reinvention. Wong played the geneticist who actually built the dinosaurs, the guy whose lab work makes the entire plot possible in the first place, even though the film barely pauses to credit him for it. He's the only actor from the original film to appear in every single Jurassic movie since. Original trilogy, then the newer World movies, eventually becoming an antagonist in the later sequels rather than just a background scientist standing near the incubators. That kind of franchise longevity is rare even among lead actors, let alone someone who started as a supporting player. Off-screen, he's been a steady TV presence for decades, playing Dr. George Huang on Law & Order SVU for over a decade, and later joining Mr. Robot in a role that earned him award consideration for playing against type. He's also spent years as an outspoken advocate for LGBTQ+ and Asian American representation in the industry, well before that kind of advocacy was common in Hollywood conversations, using whatever platform the franchise gave him. Not flashy, just the guy who never really left. And yeah, that kind of consistency doesn't get talked about enough, mostly because there's no scandal or comeback to hang a headline on. This is the one that actually surprised people. Knight Forever Newman from Seinfeld, as much as he's Nedry, spent years struggling with his weight, at one point crossing 300 pounds, a number he's talked about candidly in interviews rather than dodging. A doctor told him flatly he was heading toward an early death, no softer way to put it. Scared him, in his own words, literally to life. There wasn't a single fix, no dramatic before and after moment, just years of it. Therapy, diet changes, consistent training, the unglamorous version of transformation that doesn't make for a good magazine cover. About 110 pounds. Gone. Slowly. The hard way. And here's the twist. It didn't help the way you'd expect. Casting directors had spent decades building an entire image around a very specific look. And that image was, in a strange way, his job security. Losing it made him harder to place, not easier. Which still feels backwards, honestly, for something that was supposed to save his life rather than complicate it. At 70, he's found work again anyway, landing a role as Mr. Berg, a sharp-tempered robotics teacher, in Five Nights at Freddy's 2, a genuine box office hit in December 2025 that put him back in front of a much younger audience than the one that grew up on Newman. He got healthier, It cost him work for a while anyway, which still feels backwards, honestly. Ariana Richards, Lex Murphy, 12 years old during the kitchen scene, the one still shown in film classes as a masterclass in tension with almost nothing actually happening on screen. Just a girl, a spoon, and a raptor's reflection in the metal. And somehow that's enough to make an entire generation afraid of open kitchens. She stuck around briefly after a cameo in The Lost World, a guest spot on Boy Meets World, the kind of light, easy work that doesn't demand a child actor commit their whole adolescence to the industry. Her last film credit lands around 2013, and after that, she basically stepped out of the industry entirely, without any public drama attached to the exit. Not a fade-out, though. A choice. She became a professional visual artist. Painting, gallery shows, an actual second career built from scratch rather than traded on her old name, including a piece called Lady of the Dahlias that won real recognition in fine art circles, far from anything to do with Hollywood or dinosaurs. Most fans still connect her to that one scene, even now, more than 30 years later, which is a strange thing to carry when your actual life's work has moved on so completely. Probably the cleanest exit from Hollywood anyone on this list managed. Joseph Mazzello, Tim Murphy. Quick one to close out the actors. The kid chased through the kitchen by a T-Rex grew up to play John Deacon, bassist of Queen, in Bohemian Rhapsody. A casting choice that made a lot of people do a double take when they realized who it was. Smaller roles filled the years before that, plus a deliberate stretch at USC studying film, reportedly with a recommendation letter from Spielberg himself, a detail that suggests the pause was planned rather than a career stalling out. Then, in 2018, he was completely back on the radar. Dinosaurs to Wembley Stadium. A strange full circle for a kid who spent his childhood being electrocuted on camera and somehow still loved dinosaurs afterward. These days, he's moved into directing, and he's been publicly pitching a return to the franchise as an adult. Tim Murphy, the dinosaur-obsessed kid all grown up and inheriting Hammond's fortune. Nothing's confirmed yet, but it's the kind of pitch that makes sense on paper. And for a lot of people, that's still the version of him they remember first. The kid in the kitchen, not the bassist. Joffrey Brown and Greg Burson, two names most people wouldn't recognize by face. Everyone recognizes the scenes. Joffrey C. Brown was the raptor pen worker in the opening minutes, the one who nearly gets pulled into the enclosure before the title card even hits, setting the entire tone of the film in under 2 minutes of screen time. He was a former Major League pitcher for the Chicago Cubs, who later became a Hollywood stuntman, racking up decades of credits most people never connect to one name, working behind the scenes on films far bigger than the moment he's actually remembered for. He died in January 2014. Greg Burson voiced Mr. DNA, the cartoon guide who explains the cloning process in about 90 seconds flat, turning a dense scientific explanation into something a kid could follow and quote for decades after. He was one of the voice actors who stepped in after Mel Blanc and Daws Butler passed, keeping decades of beloved characters alive across studios that needed someone who could match voices nobody else could replicate. He died in July 2008, at 58, after ongoing health complications. Neither got a magazine cover. Both are still in this movie every single time someone hits play. And in a strange way, that's its own kind of legacy. 11 actors walked onto an island in 1993 and changed what a summer movie could look like. And the strange part is, it was never really the dinosaurs that made this one last. It's what happened after the cameras stopped. Who got to keep going? Who walked away on their own terms? And who didn't get a choice in the matter?